Hi, my name is Kenna Brand, and this is my Bio 111 project. And I chose to talk about how corn contributes to creating alternative fuel sources that better help the environment. So, I chose to talk about corn ethanol, and corn ethanol is a type of biofuel. Corn ethanol is a type of biofuel slash ethanol that will help better make petroleum gasoline kind of fade out, and it has a 10 to 90 ratio. That 10% going to be that ethanol, which most of the time is going to be corn ethanol, with a 90% crude oil mix. So corn is produced in kind of a specific way. Corn needs to be planted in rich soil in the right temperature. So in April, they are planted in very evenly spaced in the fields by a specific and special tractor by the farmers. And after about a few months of growing, they are fully grown. And this is because they gain energy from photosynthesis. And what's cool about corn with photosynthesis is that they don't use the regular pathway that most plants use. They use a different pathway that is quicker and it is more effective to go through photosynthesis. And then the corn will be harvested in about October, and it will sit in corn grain bins to allow it to dry. So to create this corn ethanol, there are two methods, and it's going to be your wet milling and your dry milling. So your wet milling, this corn will sit in a chemical solution for about 2 days, and it'll break it down into starch or corn germ. And then the starch will be fermented because yeast is added into it, and it will perform anaerobic fermentation. And as we know, that fermentation will create this kind of alcohol substance, and that is going to be your ethanol, and it also produces other byproducts. Dry milling, it has some of the same processes, except it doesn't sit in a chemical solution. It is cooked, grinded, and then it will go through that same fermentation process. But once it is fermented, it will go through something called distillation, and it is where the ethanol is purified for gasoline. So I would say that corn ethanol processing is going to be widely available, especially in the United States, because we do have a lot of land that is available for corn planting, different types of soil, different types of corn. So we do also have something called the Corn Belt, and it's very specific states like Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois that do produce most of our corn and most of our corn ethanol, and they produce billions of gallons for us yearly. And so ethanol processing still does have a carbon footprint. The actual process, the fermentation will release CO2 into the atmosphere, along with creating farms that alter environments, off-put populations, and do also release carbon, especially if you're having to cut down trees, or the fertilizer use can pollute the air and the water. But what's good about it and makes it more environmental friendly is that the corn is so close by that they take that carbon dioxide and they use it once again to keep going through photosynthesis and keep growing. So it affects the economy in a really good way. It creates tons of jobs, it helps people in rural areas, and it generates a lot of tax revenue. So it does provide, in the last year, about 56,000 direct jobs in these processing plants, and over 200,000 jobs indirectly, like management, selling, the gas business. And it does allow these rural areas to have steady jobs and steady incomes that they typically don't have access to. And in the past couple of years, the industry has generated about $10 billion in tax revenue because most of our gas that we use is the 10% ethanol to 90% crude oil based. So if funding was not an obstacle, I personally would make our ethanol to crude oil ratio higher because I think the more ethanol we use, the less oil we're drilling for, and that helps reduce the use of fossil fuels. So it will help with our pollution and all of that. However, the obstacle with that is that most of our engines cannot process high percentages of ethanol. So I would also get together a team of engineers who can make these engines for us to process it better. And these are my references. Thank you so much.